I want to peer behind the curtain of climate change denial and tease apart an example of how facts and data get distorted.
Yes, and let's look at how language gets distorted with the phrase climate change denial. Like anybody who goes against the climate change orthodoxy is a Holocaust denier.
And I want to look at how a single 5-word Jordan Peterson tweet made so many mistakes. I mean, if it wasn't so depressing, it would actually be kind of impressive. I'm Adam, a climate scientist PhD from the University of Oxford, sharing what you need to know about climate change. Speaking of what you need to know about climate change, this is what the last 10,000 years looks like. You can see that global temperatures have remained really pretty stable for most of these thousands of years. That is until the Industrial Revolution about 150 years ago, where temperatures shoot up. But how can we even know what global temperatures looked like 10,000 years ago? Wikipedia says that Daniel Gabriel Fahrenheit only invented the precision thermometer 300 years ago. Wow, that's a
Well, I don't think we're looking at the measurements of cavemen.
pretty big coincidence that he was called Fahrenheit. Yeah, I don't think that's a coincidence. Of course. He probably changed his name to match the temperature. No, I think that... Anyway, climate scientists need to use indirect measures of temperature. Things like ice cores, tree rings, and ocean sediments that trap this temperature information over the years, and we can now read. Of course, each of these is imperfect. There are going to be big error bars, plus each one only captures what's happening in one specific place. So you can't rely on one single source of this data. You have to combine multiple sources to get an accurate result. And remember that, because it's going to be important later. Don't use single source of data for prehistoric temperatures. Noted. By using detailed measurements from all over the world, carefully combined using the latest techniques, you end up with this record of global temperature change for the last 10,000 years, highlighting just how extreme modern global warming is and
1.4 degrees really isn't that extreme. And you'll note that we've seen virtually no substantial impact on the human race as a whole from the 1.4 degrees we've seen this far. Now, I'm not saying that climate change and global warming are completely benign, although I do believe there will be substantial benefits, especially to colder countries like Canada and and Russia, which thus far warming has been concentrated in, if you look at the NASA temperature data. And the reason for that is because a lot of the hottest areas, especially the more humid ones, have already maxed out on the maximum global warming they can receive because of water vapor. Water vapor is a much more potent greenhouse gas than CO2 or even the dread carbon monoxide. And so a lot of these tropical regions have so much water vapor that they already reflect back all the 100% of the radiation from the ground.
how much we're messing up our planet, our home. And speaking of messing things up, let's talk...
We're not messing it up. We use energy to transform our planet to something that can supply the needs of billions of people. So lifting the human race out of poverty, it isn't like you're making a mess in your home. It's like building the goddamn home in the first place.
Talk about a tweet from Jordan Peterson, which appears to show climate history over 9,500 years. Straight off the bat, this graph is going to look weird because look anything like the graph I just showed you. Jordan Peterson asks, anyone object to this graph? Which sounds like a rhetorical question, but it has a very real answer, which is that yes, I and many other climate scientists object to this graph. for many, many reasons. Firstly, most obviously, and let's be honest, most embarrassingly, the graph ends in 1885. They circle this little bump at the end as if to say, look how tiny recent global warming.
So, the point of the graph to me isn't that global warming isn't happening, but that the Earth in very recent times was much warmer than it is today. I think everybody agrees that global warming is occurring, but what people challenge is this notion that it's a huge catastrophic threat to the human race, an unprecedented threat, and that's what the data seems to indicate here. To me, is that variations in temperature are reasonable.
Warming is, but then they have actually left out all of the recent global warming.
And presumably that's got something to do with how the data was gathered. It could only be there was some technical limitation. I mean, the guy who gathered the data was a climate scientist and somebody who's endorsing global warming. So it's not like he was trying to hide that. It was just where the data sample ended was 150 years ago when this data was collected in the year 2000.
For context, this is what this graph would look like if it ended.
That's the takeaway, that 81.3% of observations in the past 9,500 years are higher than the most recent temperature reading, or just, more broadly that it's been much hotter in the past.
Today. But speaking of the end of the graph, this dataset that this graph is made from actually ended in 1855. So either they're lying.
That's true. Probably just sloppiness
on the axis, or they've just made a typo, and I don't actually know which is a bigger fail. But even once you take into account that
lying would be the bigger fail,
this graph leaves off all of modern global warming, you can see that something's not quite right. What's with all these spikes that are ominously circled in Microsoft Paint? Why weren't they in the dataset that I showed you earlier? Well, this graph from Jordan Peterson is taken from a single core of ice from a single location in Greenland. And remember...
Right, it's a single data point. It's not proof, but it's evidence.
When I said to you earlier, so you can't rely on one single source of this data. These sharp peaks and valleys don't mean anything when you're looking at a single ice core because there's just so much scientific uncertainty. In fact,
we know that there's natural variations in global temperature. For example, the Little Ice Age. Although the Wikipedia entry here, not so solid, it says it's not a true ice age. Well, as the link to the Ice Age period section says, an ice age is a long period in the presence of glaciers. So we're in an ice age at the moment. We have been for quite some time. It's called the Holocene period. And then there's periods of glacial and interglacial when it's getting colder or hotter.
Scientists who are responsible for putting together the temperature record over the past thousands of years, that there's no evidence for sharp rises or decreases in temperature when you look at Earth as a whole. Well, apart from the temperature spike that we've been causing for the past century or so. Yeah, apart from that one. Okay, but why should I trust you and the other climate scientists who pointed these things out? Yeah, why should I trust you and all the other climate scientists who pointed these things out? What about the climate scientists who actually came up with this data? I am so glad you asked. It's literally on the script that you gave me that I have to ask. Richard Alley, the scientist whose name is on the graph, had this to say. Using this data to argue against global warming,
I don't think anybody's arguing against global warming. As you saw in the Peterson tweet, he said that global warming is not a catastrophe. So that's a completely different claim, okay? And you can see here that he's strawmanning Peterson, attacking the much easier claim of, oh, you're a global warming denialist, or denier, the loaded language, but not taking on the much more difficult claim of global warming's not going to be a catastrophe. A 1.5 degree increase in temperature, which is what it's looking like we're going to see again. We've seen that so far through industrialization. We're probably going to see that again by the time that the world shifts to net zero. That's going to be a walk in the park, and there's a lot of people who are financially invested, climate scientists like this gentleman. They're living to the doomsday scenarios, and then there's people who like to use environmentalism and climate change as a way to attack capitalism. So they're actually just communists, and they're just hopping on the whole climate change hysteria as a means of attacking capitalism, not because they care about climate change, but because they care about communism. But I don't think very many people are denying that global warming is happening. Some people might argue it's not man-made. That's not even my argument. I accept anthropological climate change. I accept that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. I just don't think it's going to be a catastrophe.
Is, stupid or misguided or misled or something, but surely not scientifically sensible. So not exactly a glowing endorsement. In fact, Richard Alley said this way back in 2010, because, shock horror, this isn't the first time people have misguidedly misused his data set to try to mislead people about global warming. Richard Alley has referred to this misinformation as a climate zombie that just won't die. So to sum up, this graph that claims to disprove the significance of modern global warming ends before modern global warming starts, lies about where it ends.
Here's a different visualization of the Greenland ice core temperature data, and if you look at it in this way, it shows you really the historic trend is very much that the Earth was much warmer through the last 8,000 years. Now, I agree with this gentleman in the video. This is just one data point, but I think it is one data point, and absolutely you have to consider it with all the other evidence. Trying to do something like determine what the temperature was 7,000, 9,000 years ago, that's pretty tricky. And I think that a lot of humility should be used by people who claim that they do know what the temperature was 7,000 years ago, especially when various models, various data such as this ice core data may contradict their findings.
Core of ice, and so has error bars far too big for anyone to draw any significant conclusions from it. So wait, I'm getting mixed messages. Do you like the tweet or not? You mean this tweet which asks whether anyone has any objections and then was met with objections from basically all climate scientists, including the one whose name is on the graph? Yeah, I'm not a fan. And this is what I really want to talk about Jordan Peterson's approach. He acts as if he's just asking questions, just curious, perfectly reasonable academic. But if that's his approach, why doesn't he do the most basic fact-checking first? And if he had a little humility and could accept that he's not an expert in climate science, he could just call a climate scientist up. I mean, hell, he could start with the climate scientist who is named on the graph. But maybe Jordan thought it would be good to have this conversation publicly. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that for some reason he couldn't contact any climate scientists. Perhaps he forgot his email password or something. Well, then he's had plenty of time to see and read the responses of
climate scientists really act like they're the high priests of the climatologist religion, that they have the revealed truth and that people should just blindly obey them. And maybe if you're talking about how to analyze ice cores, sure. But when climatologists enter the domain of economics and politics and start making policy prescriptions, well, that's not your field of expertise. So it's just the absolute arrogance and dishonesty and just anti-scientific attitude. I mean, these people are unhinged.
Experts. Why hasn't he taken down this misleading graph now? Or at the very least, acknowledged the reply?
But it's not misleading, or at least you haven't challenged the accuracy of the data at all. So why should he take it down?
Eyes from climate scientists.
Because it doesn't go with the climatologist narrative. It's not that the data is wrong. It's that it's not in line with their narrative. It's not promoting what they want to promote, so it has to be attacked. Not refuted, just attacked.
But maybe, and hear me out because this is going to sound crazy, but maybe the point isn't to ask questions and to learn, but maybe the point is to mislead. What? No way. Because the thing is that if you actually care about the academic process and you actually care about the questions that you're posing, then you engage with the answers to those questions. But Jordan Peterson has a track record of doing the exact opposite, making statements that are misleading at best and straight up making...
He's a heretic!
Things up at worst.
There's no such thing as climate, right? Climate and everything are the same word.
His scholarly tone makes this sound so thoughtful and sensible until you pause for 1 single second and you realize, what are you talking about? I don't have anything sensible to reply to this other than that climate definitely does exist and it definitely doesn't mean everything. But all this distraction is so key to climate change denial. Its entire purpose is to disrupt the science-based conversation and delay the action that the science is telling us that...
Oh, the science is telling you to take action? The science is telling you what the right policy prescriptions are, what the impact of imposing new taxes are going to be. Climatologists are now not only studying climate, but they know all the answers for politics, for economics, for everything. Maybe we should just make this guy God Emperor of the world and be done with it.
That we need. And what is the science telling us? This is what the last 10,000 years of climate change looks like, and this is what the last 100 years of climate change
1.5 degrees. It's nothing.
Looks like. We have a choice now about what the coming decades will look like. Does anyone object to choosing the future that will cause people and planet the least harm?
The least harm? What about the billion people in the third world who are making $3 a day or less, and they need access to fossil fuels in order to work their way out of poverty? Okay, there are more than this is a complicated policy decision, and it's naive to assume that there's no cost from eliminating carbon emissions. Oil is the lifeblood of our economy, and the future prosperity of the human race depends on our consumption of it. Yes, global warming is happening. It's something to keep an eye on. We absolutely should continue transitioning away from fossil fuels towards net zero, but there are other considerations as well. Especially when it comes to places like India, places like South America, Southeast Asia, Africa. These are populous regions that are getting more populous, that are going to need to increase the amount of energy that they are using if they are to achieve a reasonable standard of living. So there are other considerations at play here.
I have a feeling Jordan Peterson might. Don't get me started. And look, in this video we've just been talking about how temperatures have changed over the last 10,000 years. Do you want to know what else has been happening? Yeah, of course I do. Well, then you're...
I just appreciate how you're doing your part for the climate by not washing your hair. Fight on, brother.